supposedly Snoop, got the okay from my grandma to go to her house and get my pop's masters. She, pretty much showed him where the masters were, however this occurred, and he left with the masters. My uncle, when my daddy got sick, my uncle placed the masters at my grandma's house.
Gotcha.
He wasn't aware that Snoop went to my grandma's house and got the masters.
Nathaniel Hale Jr., the son of the late Nate Dogg, just accused Snoop Dogg of taking his father's master recordings without the family's approval. This dropped on February 10th, 2026, and it's creating serious tension between two families that go back decades in Long Beach. We're talking about one of hip-hop's most iconic partnerships, and now it's getting messy over business, loyalty, and who actually controls Nate Dogg's legacy. Nathaniel made the accusation public through Instagram. He didn't hold back. He said Snoop took control of his father's masters when Death Row Records got acquired, and the family had no say in it. No conversation, no agreement, just a move that happened behind closed doors. That's when things shifted.
Rap icon Snoop Dogg now owns the record label that propelled him to stardom. Death Row Records released Snoop Dogg's classic debut album back in 1993, along with hits from Dr. Dre and Tupac. The label filed for bankruptcy in 2006, eventually falling into the hands of a private equity fund who sold it to Snoop Dogg.
The timing of Nathaniel's post is what caught people's attention. He made the accusation while Snoop was in Italy for the 2026 Winter Olympics, doing promotional appearances and handling brand deals. Nathaniel pointed this out specifically, like the timing wasn't coincidental. He said Snoop was managing the optics overseas while this situation with the Masters was unfolding back home. According to Nathaniel, this wasn't just about the business side. It was about respect, about family being looped into decisions that directly affect their father's work and legacy. He made it clear that the Hale family should have been consulted before any transfers happened. Nobody expected what happened next.
How did you link up with Nate Dogg?
1986 at Poly High School. Nate was in the 12th grade, I was in the 10th grade. We was in a science class. I don't know how we was in the same science class. We was sitting in the back of the class, and I would beat on the tape. And this nigga would be singing like other people's songs, but he would make them dirty.
Snoop and Nate Dogg were cousins. They grew up together in Long Beach. When Nate Dogg passed away in 2011 after suffering multiple strokes, Snoop was one of the first people to speak publicly about the loss. He's talked about Nate in interviews for years, always with love and respect. So this accusation cuts deep because it's coming from within the family, not from outsiders or critics. Nate Dogg's contributions to West Coast hip-hop are undeniable. His voice defined the sound of countless hits from the 90s and 2000s. Regulate with Warren G. The next episode with Snoop and Dre Area Codes with Ludacris. When he died, he left behind a catalog that still gets played today. Then the situation got more layered.
Suge Knight is the heart and soul of Death Row Records. To be able to understand the label, you have to understand who he is. Snoop, Tupac, Dre were in charge of the music, but Suge was the force to be reckoned with. He put Death Row Records on the map. Knight is a mythical figure.
The controversial CEO of Death Row Records, the most feared figure in all of hip-hop.
Death Row's ownership history is a tangled mess. Suge Knight founded the label in 1991. It became one of the most powerful forces in music during the 90s. Then it collapsed under legal issues, financial problems, and internal conflicts. The label went through bankruptcy and changed hands several times over the years. By the time Snoop bought Death Row in February 2022, it had been owned by a company called MNRK Music Group. Snoop's purchase was symbolic for him, owning the label that made him famous, taking back control of his own legacy. He talked about turning Death Row into the first major label in the metaverse, exploring NFTs and digital ownership. But here's where it gets tricky.
What came about for me, like observing and watching Death Row Records be moved around, mishandled, different owners, and me just watching my legacy just fall apart because those first two records are going to always be connected to me. And I would always be out and about and people would want me to sign Doggy Style or sign a Dogfather. And I was like, damn, I'm signing these albums, but I don't even own this shit. And the way y'all handling it, y'all mishandling my legacy.
Right.
So when the time came for Death Row to be moved into some real investors who had it, somebody in the business world reached out to me and was like, Death Row is for sale, but they'll only sell it to you.
When Snoop bought the label, the deal included the catalog of recordings from Death Row's classic era. That catalog had music from multiple artists who were signed to the label back in the day. Nate Dogg recorded material under Death Row during that time, which means those masters were part of the package Snoop acquired. The question Nathaniel is raising is whether the Hale family knew this was happening, whether anyone reached out to them before the transaction went through, whether there was any attempt to include them in the conversation about their father's music-changing ownership. According to Nathaniel, the answer is no. This is where everything changed.
Own however much breaks down into our share, aside from what the mother or the wife got type.
So Latoya. Is Latoya still bringing?
No, Latoya, she's got an attorney. You know, her attorney show up and this is what they standing on.
Stuff, right?
We had to get that up when he passed.
They made y'all sell it?
When he passed away, we gave that up. And we gave it up because he had medical records and medical bills. Because he was sick for so long.
Okay, so y'all didn't take care of that.
And taxes too. And let me not just say medical bill, but we had taxes and shit too. A lot of shit went to taxes.
The legal framework around master recordings is complex. When an artist signs with a label, the label typically owns the masters unless there's a specific contract stating otherwise. If Nate Dogg signed those agreements with Death Row back in the 90s, then legally, the label owned those recordings. When ownership of the label transferred, the masters transferred with it. But legal ownership and family respect are two different things. Nathaniel's point isn't necessarily about the law, it's about how the situation was handled. Whether Snoop, as family, should have approached the Hales before finalizing the deal. Whether there should have been communication about what this meant for Nate Dogg's estate and legacy. Snoop hasn't responded publicly to Nathaniel's accusations yet. There's been no statement, no Instagram post, no interview addressing it. That silence is noticeable, especially for someone who's usually active on social media and quick to engage with fans and critics. But the story didn't end there.
I gotta get this on camera for you.
Yeah, really.
Nate Dogg was one of my closest friends, you know what I'm saying? We started 213 together, me, him, and Warren G. Without 213, there wouldn't really be no gangster rap on the West Coast, because we the ones who really showed them how to really do it for real. A lot of them was talking about it, but we was really being about it. And 213 was the foundation to that. Warren G, Nate Dogg, and Snoop Dogg. And when Nate Dogg passed, it's like a piece of us was taken away from us. But through his music and the spirit of who he was, we're gonna continue to keep him alive. The people have been supporting, you know, the tributes that we do for him every night.
The relationship between Snoop and the Hale family was solid for years after Nate Dogg's death. Snoop has consistently honored Nate in public, mentioned him in songs, hosted tributes on anniversaries. There was no public indication of tension or conflict between them. So this accusation came as a surprise to people who follow both of them. Nathaniel's Instagram post was direct. He didn't sugarcoat it or try to be diplomatic. He said what he felt needed to be said, and he did it publicly instead of handling it privately. That choice matters because it signals he either tried the private route and it didn't work, or he felt the public pressure was necessary to get a response. The specifics of what Nathaniel wants aren't fully clear from his post. Does he want the masters returned to the family? Does he want financial compensation? Does he want acknowledgement and an apology? Or is he simply airing out frustration about being left out of a major decision? Then it escalated further.
A lot of us make records, get our publishing up, and then we sell it. And then we think we did a good thing. And when you sell that, okay, if you get 100 million, what state you live in? Okay, knock off some taxes for that. Okay, how many family members you got? How many people in your family not working? Okay, half that's gone. When you could have been having a pipeline forever, forever and ever and ever that your family can eat off of forever. Snoop Dogg ain't sold his publishing. Snoop Dogg owned his label. So it's teaching. A lot of people selling their things, but what does that leave for the generation after you? Like, think about the families that have those names where their family members are still eating. You can go to the Hiltons, you can go to the Crafts, you can just
Rockefeller.
Walton.
Yes.
Yeah.
This situation touches on a bigger conversation happening in hip-hop right now. Artists fighting for control of their masters, labels being called out for unfair contracts, the push for ownership and independence becoming a standard part of the industry dialogue. Jay-Z, Taylor Swift, Kanye West, they've all talked publicly about masters and what it means to own your work. Snoop buying Death Row was supposed to be a win in that conversation, an artist taking back what was his. But Nathaniel's accusation complicates that narrative. It raises the question, what about the artists who didn't live long enough to fight for their own masters? What happens to their families when deals get made? Death Row's catalog includes music from artists who are no longer alive. Tupac, Nate Dogg. Their estates should theoretically have a say in how their music is handled and who profits from it. But the legal reality often doesn't align with that expectation. The complications kept building.
how a record is broken down. So they tell you, you make a song, I write a song and I rap the song, I record the song. Once I release the song, there is what's called a master and a publishing portion of the record. So the master is the recording of it. So if I sign a record deal or a recording deal, I sign away my masters, which means the label owns the recording of that music. On the publishing side, if I write a record and I sign away my publishing in a publishing deal, they own the composition of work. So the idea of it.
One of the issues here is communication. Even if the deal was legally sound, even if Snoop had every right to purchase those masters as part of the Death Row acquisition, the family could have been informed. A phone call, a meeting, something to acknowledge that this was happening and to explain the situation. Nathaniel's accusation suggests that didn't happen, that the first time the family learned about it was after the fact. That's what seems to have hurt the most. Not just the business move itself, but the way it went down. There's also the element of trust. When you're dealing with family, especially family in the same industry, there's an expectation of transparency. Snoop and Nate Dogg built their careers together. Their music is intertwined. The idea that Snoop would make a major move involving Nate's work without consulting the family feels like a betrayal to Nathaniel. Things started connecting. Financial implications of this are significant. Master recordings generate revenue every time the music is played, streamed, licensed, or sampled. Nate Dogg's catalog still brings in money. If Snoop owns those masters through Death Row, then he controls that revenue stream. The Hale family might be entitled to royalties depending on Nate Dogg's original contracts, but ownership is different from royalties. Ownership means control. It means deciding how the music is used, where it's licensed, what happens to it in the future. That's power. And that's what Nathaniel is saying his family lost without their knowledge or consent. The other factor is Snoop's public image right now. He's everywhere. He's doing the Olympics coverage. He's launching business ventures. He's become a mainstream cultural icon beyond just hip-hop. This accusation comes at a time when Snoop's brand is at an all-time high, which might be why Nathaniel chose this moment to speak out. Maximum visibility means maximum pressure. The picture became clearer.
This guy's got his paws in everything. From his own wine brand, Snoop Cali Red, to his cannabis line, Leafs by Snoop. And did you know he's a tech investor too? Gaming? Oh, he's all in. Remember when he streamed on Twitch? Absolute legend. Plus, he's got TV shows, Cooking with Martha Stewart, and even voice acting in animated movies. Snoop's empire is like a buffet of awesomeness.
Let's talk about what the Death Row purchase actually meant in practical terms. When Snoop announced he was buying the label, he paid an undisclosed amount to MNRK Music Group. The exact price never went public, but industry estimates put it in the multi-million-dollar range. That purchase gave him ownership of the Death Row name, the brand, and the master recordings that were still under the label's control. Not all of Death Row's catalog was included. Some artists had already negotiated their masters back or had separate agreements. But the core catalog from the 90s era, the recordings that made Death Row legendary, those were part of what Snoop acquired. And Nate Dogg's material was in that package. Here's what makes this complicated from a legal standpoint. When Nate Dogg signed with Death Row in the early 90s, those contracts were standard for the time. Artists didn't have the leverage they have now. Labels owned everything. The artist got paid in advance, maybe points on the back end, but the masters belonged to the company. That was the deal. So legally, Snoop's purchase was clean. He bought the label, he got the masters. But Nathaniel's argument isn't about legality, it's about ethics. It's about what should have happened versus what the contracts say had to happen. Then came another angle.
So when we had this court appointed for like the last 11, 12 years.
Wait a minute. So wait a minute. The court was controlling the trust?
Come on, man.
Oh, that's
They
terrible.
appointed someone to control it, but you know how that go.
Yeah, they spending all the money.
Come on.
I know all about that.
Come on, dog. Come on. All of it.
That's crazy
You feel
that
me?
they did.
It's about 9 of us.
Okay, so it's 9 of you guys, and all of you guys are somewhat attached to that trust.
Right.
Is that why they tried to put a person in charge of that?
Right. And let me, also take it a little deeper, right? Like, we don't all agree, and I've tried to get everybody to agree. And when everybody don't agree, then everybody got attorneys. You know what the result is.
Everybody wasting money.
You feel me? Then we go into mediation, and it's So, but right now it's like we got the LOC, right? Or we got that in place?
There's a precedent for this kind of situation. When Tupac's estate dealt with his unreleased music and masters, there were disputes. His mother, Afeni Shakur, fought for years to gain control and protect his legacy. She eventually succeeded, but it took legal battles and negotiations. The same thing happened with the notorious B.I.G.'s estate. His mother, Valletta Wallace, had to navigate complex legal waters to ensure his music was handled properly. These cases set examples for how estates should be involved in decisions about an artist's work after they're gone. Nate Dogg's situation is similar but different. He died in 2011, more than a decade before Snoop bought Death Row. During those years, the Hale family presumably had some relationship with whoever owned the label at the time. They would have been dealing with royalty payments, licensing requests, all the administrative stuff that comes with a deceased artist's catalog. When ownership changed hands in 2022, that relationship should have continued or been renegotiated. Nathaniel's accusation suggests it didn't, that the transition happened without the family being brought into the conversation. The layers kept adding up.
You know what I mean? That's how you felt. Like, God damn, that's the fee you pay to get in the game.
Wow. So this piece of paper really holds this much power?
They just spend these kids, man. People get all the time.
Where do you learn it? There's no school for hip-hop.
Another piece of this is Snoop's intentions with Death Row. He's talked publicly about wanting to do right by the legacy of the label. He's spoken about honoring the artists who built it. He's mentioned wanting to create opportunities for new artists under the Death Row banner. All of that sounds good on paper. But if Nathaniel's accusations are true, then there's a disconnect between what Snoop says publicly and what happened privately with the Hale family. That disconnect is what damages trust. It's what makes people question whether the public statements are genuine or just good PR. Snoop has always been media savvy. He knows how to manage his image. He knows what to say and when to say it. His rebrand from controversial gangster rapper to family-friendly cultural ambassador took years of strategic moves. This situation with Nathaniel threatens that carefully constructed image. The public perception angle matters here. Snoop's fan base is loyal, but they also value authenticity. If this story gains traction and people start seeing Snoop as someone who did his own family wrong over business, that could damage his reputation in ways that affect his brand partnerships and public appearances. Things took another turn. The Long Beach connection between Snoop and Nate Dogg runs deeper than just music. They came up together in the same neighborhoods, dealt with the same struggles, and represented the same city on a global stage. That shared history is part of what made their music authentic. It's what made their partnership legendary. When Nate Dogg died, Snoop lost more than a collaborator. He lost family. He lost someone who'd been there since the beginning. The tributes Snoop paid to Nate over the years seemed genuine. The way he talked about him in interviews, the emotion in his voice when Nate's name came up, it all felt real. That's why Nathaniel's accusation hits so hard. It's not just about business. It's about whether those tributes and that emotion were backed up by action, whether Snoop's love for Nate extended to respecting his family after he was gone. From Nathaniel's perspective, the answer is no. The masters changed hands without the family knowing. That feels like a violation of the trust and respect that should exist between family members, especially when one of them is gone and can't speak for himself. The situation got even more complex. There's also the question of what other families are thinking right now. If Nate Dogg's family feels like they were cut out of the process, are there other families of deceased Death Row artists who feel the same way? Did Snoop reach out to Tupac's estate? Did he communicate with anyone else whose music was part of the catalog he acquired? We don't have answers to those questions yet because nobody else has spoken publicly. But Nathaniel's accusation could open the door for others to come forward if they have similar grievances. That could turn this from a personal dispute into a broader issue about how Snoop handled the entire Death Row acquisition. The business side of this gets even more interesting when you consider what Snoop has done with Death Row since buying it. He's released music through the label. He's used the brand for merchandise. He's explored the NFT and metaverse angle. All of that generates revenue. And if Nate Dogg's masters are part of what's being monetized, then his family should benefit. But benefiting financially and being consulted about decisions are two different things. Nathaniel's complaint seems to be more about being excluded from the process than about not receiving money, though the money certainly matters too. A new dimension emerged. Snoop has built an empire over the past decade. He's got his hands in everything from cannabis products to cooking shows to youth football leagues. He's proven he's more than just a rapper. He's a businessman. He knows how to diversify, how to build brands, how to stay stay relevant. But business success doesn't always translate to personal relationships being handled well. Nathaniel's accusation suggests that somewhere in Snoop's rise as a mogul, the personal connection with the Hale family got lost or overlooked. Whether that was intentional or just a casualty of busy schedules and complex business deals is unclear. What we do know is that Nathaniel felt strongly enough about this to go public. That's not a small decision. Going after someone as powerful and beloved as Snoop Dogg takes courage, especially when you're calling out family. Nathaniel had to know the backlash he might face. He had to know some people would side with Snoop regardless of the facts, but he did it anyway. That speaks to how serious this is for him and his family. The tension mounted. One thing that hasn't happened yet is any kind of public defense of Snoop from other people in his circle. Usually when someone faces accusations, their friends and collaborators speak up. They vouch for their character. They provide context or counter-arguments. But so far, nobody stepped forward to defend Snoop on this. That silence is telling. It could mean people are waiting to see how Snoop handles it before they comment. It could mean they don't want to get involved in a family dispute. Or it could mean they don't have a good defense to offer because Nathaniel's accusations are accurate. The hip-hop community tends to rally around its own when they're under attack. But this situation is different. It's family versus family. It's not an outside threat. It's internal conflict. And that makes people more hesitant to take sides publicly. Meanwhile, the longer Snoop stays silent, the more it looks like he's avoiding the issue. In the court of public opinion, silence can be interpreted as guilt, even if Snoop's lawyers are telling him not to comment while they sort things out legally. The lack of response is creating a narrative that he doesn't have a good explanation. More details surfaced. The revenue generated from Nate Dogg's masters isn't just about album sales anymore. It's streaming royalties, sync licensing for movies and TV shows, samples used in new songs, and commercial uses. Every time someone uses a Nate Dogg hook or his voice appears in a track, money gets generated. If Snoop owns those masters, he controls all of that. He decides what gets licensed and what doesn't. He collects the revenue. And while the Hale family might get a percentage through royalty agreements, they don't have decision-making power unless they own the masters. That lack of control is what Nathaniel seems to be fighting for. Not just money, but the right to have a say in how his father's voice is used, to be able to approve or deny certain uses, to protect the legacy from being exploited or misused. Snoop's track record with Death Row so far has been respectful. He hasn't done anything obviously disrespectful with the catalog, but Nathaniel's point is that the family should have been consulted before any of this became Snoop's decision to make alone. The stakes became clearer. Warren G., who made Regulate with Nate Dogg, hasn't commented on this situation either. That's notable because Warren G. was close with both Nate and Snoop. He's part of that Long Beach crew. His perspective could shed light on the dynamics between these families and how things were supposed to be handled. The fact that Warren G. hasn't spoken up could mean he's staying neutral, or it could mean he's working behind the scenes to help mediate, or maybe he just doesn't want to get pulled into what could become a messy public battle. What's clear is that this situation has ripple effects beyond just Snoop and Nathaniel. It affects how people view the entire Death Row acquisition. It raises questions about the process and whether other families should have been consulted. It challenges the narrative that Snoop buying Death Row was purely about legacy and empowerment. The industry is watching this closely because it sets a precedent. If Nathaniel's accusations gain traction and force Snoop to respond or make changes, it could influence how other artists handle similar situations in the future. It could create expectations around transparency and family involvement when deceased artists' catalogs change hands. On the other hand, if nothing comes of this and Snoop's ownership stands without any resolution with the Hale family, it sends a different message. That business is business, and legal ownership trumps family considerations. Neither outcome is ideal. The best resolution would be Snoop and the Hale family coming together, having a real conversation about what happened and what should happen moving forward. Finding a way to honor Nate Dogg's legacy that respects both his music and his family. Whether that happens depends on both sides being willing to communicate and compromise. Right now, we're in a standoff. Nathaniel made his public statement. Snoop hasn't responded, and everyone's waiting to see who makes the next move. So here's where we are. Nathaniel Hale Jr. accused Snoop Dogg of taking his father's masters without the family's approval when Snoop bought Death Row Records. The accusation came while Snoop was in Italy for the Winter Olympics. There's been no public response from Snoop yet. The situation raises questions about family, respect, business, and who controls the legacy of artists who've passed away. What happens next could go several ways. Snoop could address it and try to resolve things privately with the Hale family. This could turn into a legal battle over estate rights and contract interpretations, or it could stay in the public eye as an unresolved conflict that changes how people view both Snoop's business moves and his relationship with Nate Dogg's family. There's also the possibility possibility that this sparks a larger conversation about how estates are handled in hip-hop, about what responsibilities living artists have to the families of their deceased collaborators, about whether the industry needs better protections for artists who die young and leave their music in the hands of labels and business entities. The impact on Snoop's brand is something to watch. He's built himself into a cultural icon who transcends hip-hop. He's become someone parents feel comfortable having their kids watch during the Olympics. This accusation threatens that wholesome image by painting him as someone who potentially betrayed family for business gain. For Nathaniel, the risk is being seen as going after Snoop for money or attention. But from everything he said, this seems to be about principle, about doing right by his father's memory, about making sure the Hale family has a voice in decisions about Nate Dogg's music. The truth is probably more complicated than either side's public statements suggest. Business deals involve layers of legal agreements, third parties, timing issues, and considerations that don't always translate well to social media posts. But at the heart of it, this is about whether Snoop did right by his cousin's family. And right now, Nathaniel is saying he didn't. Let me know in the comments what you think about this situation. Should Snoop have consulted the family before acquiring those masters? Is this a legal issue or a personal one? And if you want to stay updated on how this develops, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the follow-up. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.